Imagine spending your weekend painting your fence, only to have a neighbor call 911 on you, accusing you of suspicious behavior. What starts as a simple home project turns into an unexpected investigation that uncovers a hidden web of crime and corruption in the neighborhood. Stick around to see how one man's fence painting led to the biggest bust of his career. The Florida sun beat down on my back, turning my kiss the cook apron into a personal sauna. I, Detective Lucas Martin of the FBI on a temporary undercover gardening leave, slapped another coat of Patriot Blue onto my white picket fence. Honestly, after taking down a multi-state money laundering syndicate disguised as a chain of car washes, painting fences seemed like the therapy I desperately needed. That is, until she showed up. Agnes Plumtart waddled out of her pristine, perfectly maintained lawn like an angry penguin in a pink velour tracksuit, complete with motivational slogans like "good vibes only" bedazzled across her chest. I couldn't help but feel the irony as sweat dripped down my forehead. Agnes was the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer, always patrolling the block, ensuring no one deviated from her personal idea of order. "Excuse me, sir," she screeched, her voice piercing the calm suburban air like an air raid siren. She waddled toward me in those bedazzled sneakers, her eyes narrowing with suspicion as she scanned my paint-streaked boots and sweat-soaked bandana. "Are you even allowed to do that?" I paused, dipped my brush back in the paint, and smiled my best, just a regular guy smile. "Good morning, Agnes. Just adding a fresh coat of paint to the fence. Thought the Patriot Blue would brighten the place up." Her eyes narrowed even further, scanning me up and down as if I were a foreign invader. "Brighten up? Or lower the property values?" she scoffed, her tone dripping with condescension. "I haven't seen you around here before, and that color, it's just too loud, too bold." "Well, I just moved in last week," I said, extending my hand. "Welcome to the neighborhood." I figured playing the new guy card might ease things up, but she recoiled as though I'd offered her a handful of snakes. "I'm calling the cops," she declared, already pulling out her phone with surprising speed. "I don't know who you are or what you're doing, but I don't like the way this feels. Something is wrong here." Before I could process what was happening, Agnes had already dialed 911, her shrill voice echoing in my ears. "Yes, 911. I need to report a suspicious person," she said. "He's painting his fence, and I don't think he even belongs here. I think he's a large black man, and he's acting like he owns the place." Her voice became even more indignant. "And the fence. That color is hideous. It's ruining the neighborhood." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was really calling the police because I was painting my fence? This had to be some kind of joke. But Agnes, bless her, was dead serious. I could hear her voice rising in pitch on the phone. "Yes, 911. I need to report a suspicious person. He's painting his fence, and I don't think he even lives here. He's a big black man, and he's acting like he belongs here. And the fence! The color is so loud it's a threat to the entire block." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. A threat to the block? My fence? Really? I leaned against the freshly painted wood, trying to look as casual as possible. The whole situation felt like it was spiraling out of control, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of Agnes's eyes on me, as if she were convinced I was some sort of criminal mastermind. Minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the air. I turned my head just in time to see a squad car pulling into the driveway, the siren mercifully silent. Officer Daniels, a young rookie who looked like he had just stepped out of the academy, got out of the car and hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting between Agnes and me. "Ma'am, you called 911 about fence painting?" Officer Daniels asked, his voice unsure. He gave me a wary glance as if trying to figure out if I was a criminal mastermind or just a regular guy with an unusual hobby. "Yes, officer, that's exactly what's going on here," Agnes chirped, her hands on her hips as she puffed out her chest proudly. "This man is a menace to the entire neighborhood. He's painting his fence in a color that could lower everyone's property values. And I don't even know if he lives here." I suppressed a sigh and pulled out my wallet, flashing my FBI badge with a flick of the wrist. Officer Daniels' eyes widened as he caught sight of it, and Agnes froze, her face shifting from anger to confusion. "Ma'am," Officer Daniels began, his voice steadying, "are you aware that making a false 911 call is a crime?" he asked, his gaze shifting from me back to Agnes. Agnes, however, was undeterred. "FBI?" she scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. He probably bought that badge off the internet. I demand you arrest him right now for crimes against homeowners associations." Officer Daniels, now looking thoroughly uncomfortable, shifted his stance. "Ma'am, we'll need to talk more about this back at your house." He gestured subtly for me to continue painting, and I gladly obeyed. As they stepped away, I could overhear snippets of their conversation. "Ma'am, making a false report to 911 can lead to criminal charges," Officer Daniels said gently. "I suggest you calm down." Agnes's voice rose in indignation. "I don't care. He's an intruder. I want him arrested." As I continued to paint, I couldn't help but think about how absurd this whole situation was. Here I was, trying to enjoy a little peace and quiet with a simple home improvement project, and I was being interrogated like some kind of criminal. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Agnes wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was acting like a professional troublemaker. Minutes later, the phone call ended, and Officer Daniels stepped away from Agnes, looking thoroughly exasperated. He glanced over at me and gave a small nod, silently acknowledging that I wasn't the problem here. Agnes, on the other hand, was still fuming, muttering to herself about property values and outsiders. "Ma'am," Officer Daniels said in a calm, controlled voice, "we're going to need you to step back a bit. We'll be in touch if there's anything further." Agnes opened her mouth to protest but was silenced when Officer Daniels held up his hand. As she stormed back to her perfectly manicured lawn, I heard the officer murmur, "Making false reports like this can cause a lot of trouble, ma'am. You might want to reconsider how you handle this situation." Agnes scoffed, clearly not taking him seriously. Once Officer Daniels left, I went back to my fence. My therapy painting had become an involuntary performance for the entire neighborhood, and I didn't even mind anymore. In fact, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction that, despite everything, I was still getting my fence painted, and Agnes's antics had somehow made the process far more interesting. As I dipped my brush into the bucket of paint again, I couldn't help but feel like there was more going on here than just an annoying neighbor. The whole neighborhood had an eerie, too-perfect vibe to it, like a community that was hiding something underneath its pristine lawns and fancy SUVs. I had an inkling that I might be about to stumble upon something far bigger than I expected, and Agnes was somehow at the center of it all. The next day, after Agnes had time to stew over her failed 911 call, I got a visit from an unexpected guest. As I was enjoying my morning coffee on the porch, I noticed a sleek black car pulling up to the house next door. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, looking way too polished for a suburban neighborhood. He waved at Agnes, who was still tending to her precious garden, and the two exchanged a few words. Something about the way they spoke made me uneasy. There was an unspoken familiarity between them, like two people who had worked together on something shady in the past. I watched them for a moment longer before returning to my task. That man's arrival could mean something, and I was beginning to think that I was looking at the tip of the iceberg. Agnes might have just led me to something I couldn't have imagined. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Everywhere I went, there was this nagging sense that eyes were on me. It wasn't just Agnes and her obsessive garden patrol. It was like the whole neighborhood had been briefed to keep an eye on me. I decided to make my move. I needed to gather information on the neighborhood, and I wasn't going to do it the obvious way. No more paintbrush therapy for me. Instead, I spent the next few days walking around, pretending to admire the flowers and chatting with people. Everyone seemed friendly enough, but there was always something off about their smiles. Too perfect. Too rehearsed. It wasn't until I bumped into an older man named Joe that I started to get a sense of what was going on. Joe had lived in the neighborhood for years, and he wasn't shy about letting me know he had a few insider tips. "You ever notice how the same people are always at the HOA meetings?" he asked, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Barry Kensington, Agnes Plumtart. There's something funny about them, trust me. I raised an eyebrow. Joe continued. It's not just the property values they're obsessed with, it's the control. The HOA around here, it's like a little mafia. Barry especially has a way of getting people to do what he wants, and anyone who doesn't play along, well, they don't last long in this neighborhood. That was my first solid lead. Barry Kensington wasn't just the HOA president, he was the kingpin of something much more dangerous. And Agnes? She was his right-hand woman, keeping an eye on the street and reporting back to him on anything and everything. I spent the next few weeks gathering intel. The more I learned, the more the pieces began to fit together. Barry wasn't just running a neighborhood watch program. He was orchestrating illegal property deals and money laundering schemes, all under the guise of suburban perfection. Agnes was more than just a nosy neighbor. She was the enforcer, the one who made sure no one stepped out of line. One day, I decided it was time to take things to the next level. I invited Sarah to join me for a little neighborhood social. Of course, it wasn't a real social. It was a covert operation to get to the bottom of what was really going on. We had already planted a few key pieces of surveillance equipment around the neighborhood. Hidden cameras, microphones, even a few strategically placed drones. As we mingled, I kept my eyes peeled for anything suspicious. It didn't take long before I saw Barry talking to a couple of unfamiliar faces near the mailbox, handing over a thick envelope. It was subtle, but it was enough. I signaled Sarah, who was already positioned across the street, and we began recording. The pieces were falling into place faster than I expected. With each new bit of information, I could feel the weight of the case pressing down on me, and I knew the time was coming for the operation to go public. The day of the big reveal finally arrived. I had spent the past few days preparing everything, making sure the evidence we had collected was airtight. With Sarah's help, we'd gathered enough intel to bring Barry Kensington and his criminal enterprise down for good. Now it was just a matter of timing. I sat on my front porch, staring at the blue fence I had so lovingly painted, knowing that soon it would all come crashing down. The neighborhood, which had seemed so perfect just a few weeks ago, was about to be exposed for what it really was, a front for illegal activities. And as much as I was ready for the truth to come out, part of me felt a strange sense of satisfaction in knowing I had uncovered something so dark hidden beneath the surface. At the crack of dawn, the operation began. FBI agents in black SUVs rolled into the neighborhood, their sirens silent but their presence unmistakable. I watched as agents moved quickly surrounding Barry Kensington's mansion. Meanwhile, other teams descended on key properties, including Agnes's. I could hear the chaos beginning to unfold. Shouted orders, doors being kicked open, the unmistakable sound of handcuffs clicking shut. Barry Kensington was apprehended on his golf course, just as I had hoped, caught completely off guard. His usually smooth demeanor was replaced with a look of shock and confusion. But the real spectacle came when they dragged Agnes out of her house. There she was, still wearing her garish pink velour tracksuit, looking every bit the part of the suburban Karen she was. As the officers cuffed her and led her to the waiting police car, she screamed about her civil rights being violated, her hands waving frantically in the air. "You!" she screamed, her face turning beet red as she pointed directly at me. "This is all your fault, you and your damn blue fence." I couldn't help but smile as they shoved her into the car. Agnes was finally getting what was coming to her. As the operation continued, I stood back and watched the agents move through the neighborhood, gathering evidence, seizing property, and arresting those involved in the money laundering and illegal property dealings. I had to admit, it felt good to see the law finally catching up with these criminals. By the end of the day, the neighborhood looked like a war zone. Black SUVs, police tape, and flashing lights everywhere. The people who had once lived their perfect manufactured lives were now facing the consequences of their actions. Barry Kensington, Agnes Plumtart, and the others were arrested and taken into custody. The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. People were shocked, confused, and in some cases relieved. The idyllic suburban life they had known was shattered, but in its place there was a sense of justice. It wasn't the kind of justice that was flashy or dramatic. It was quiet, understated, and long overdue. As for me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. I had started this whole thing with a simple task, painting my fence. But in the end, that little project had led me to uncover something much bigger than I had ever expected. It had been a crazy ride, but it was worth it. I went back inside, grabbed a cold drink, and sat down on the couch. My phone buzzed. Sarah was calling. Well, she said when I answered, I guess you can cross saving the neighborhood off your to-do list now. I laughed, feeling the weight of the day lift off my shoulders. I guess so. But hey, I wouldn't have gotten here without a little help from my blue fence. The days following the raid were strange. The neighborhood felt different, less perfect, more real. People I had once waved at in passing now avoided eye contact, unsure of how to behave around the guy who had uncovered their secret lives. But there was a new sense of freedom in the air. The tension that had once been a constant presence in the neighborhood had evaporated. People were starting to talk openly, share stories, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like a real community again. I spent the next few weeks finishing the repairs on my house, not just the fence, but the other little projects I had put off. Fixing the mailbox, repainting the trim, fixing the lawnmower that had been collecting dust in my garage. It felt good to finally settle in. Then one afternoon, I was out front trimming the hedges when a familiar face appeared in my yard. It was one of the neighbors, Mary, the one who always seemed to be walking her dog at the same time every day. She hesitated for a moment, then walked up to me, smiling cautiously. Hey, I just wanted to say, thank you, she said, looking around nervously before continuing. For, everything. You helped us more than you know. Things around here are, well, they're better now. I raised an eyebrow, not sure if she was talking about the whole situation or something else entirely. Better how? Well, for one thing, Barry and Agnes, those two had their claws in everything. Now people can finally breathe a little. She sighed, a look of relief crossing her face. I can't say it was a perfect neighborhood before, but now it feels like it's our neighborhood again. I smiled, pleased by her words. I'm glad to hear that. I guess sometimes it takes a little disruption to remind people what really matters. Exactly, Mary replied, her smile widening. And hey, you've got a permanent spot at our next block party. No more weird vibes from Agnes, right? I chuckled, nodding. I'll be there, but I think I'll pass on wearing any more bedazzled tracksuits. As the weeks went by, life in the neighborhood continued to improve. More people began to gather for real conversations, no longer afraid of being judged by the HOA or the overbearing personalities that had once controlled the streets. The power had shifted, and for the first time, it felt like the community truly belonged to the people who lived in it. As for me, I still couldn't help but laugh every time I thought about Agnes. I never would have imagined that a simple act of painting a fence would have turned into something so big. Sometimes the smallest actions can cause the biggest changes. And in the end, the neighborhood was better for it. They weren't just free from the stranglehold of corruption and greed. They had learned how to stand up for what was right, even when it meant confronting the darkness hidden behind a perfectly manicured lawn. I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, I'd found my true purpose here, not in the big FBI cases, but in this small, quiet neighborhood. It might not have been the job I thought I'd signed up for, but it was exactly the one I needed.